Welcome to the show, Loretta, and thank you for your time. Thank you for being my first guest at the Atlanta Diaries podcast. This is just so exciting.
Thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled, honored, and very humbled to be here.
Absolutely. And without further ado, I'm going to dive into our conversation.
Perfect. Let's go, Abik. Very excited. Thank you so much.
Awesome. I've read about it, but I still can't help saying, Loretta, you're such a force of nature. How do you do this?
I get asked this a lot. And I think, force of nature is probably a really nice way of saying it, but it's like, a tornado or a tsunami headed your way. It's like, I think everyone's lives are changed when they meet Loretta. I think a lot of it has to do with my upbringing. I sit here very humbled and very grateful for how much love I have for my parents. They've always raised me to be a amazing kick bleep girl. And they said anything that my brothers can do, I can do it better. They've never once made me feel small, inferior, that I could not achieve anything that I wanted. I think when you're raised with that sort of confidence, you can't help but feel you want to pay it forward. At least that's how I'm raised, right? Because as I got older, I recognized that the gift that I have from my parents is a privilege, not a right. Most folks don't have not just both parents. They may not even have one parent or role model. So I think that grounding keeps me very humble and it makes me wanting to do more for the community. The other is, I think, when you are given so much opportunity and you have a platform, you can't help but want to amplify that. So how I always tell some of my folks who ask me, how do you bring so much energy into a room? Am I tired? Am I human? Yes, I am, right? As you would know, sometimes I'm assisting on 3-4 hours sleep. But when I show up in a room, I tell myself, for you to invite me in the space is an honor, a privilege. And I reciprocate by giving you the best of me. I'm not going to come in like sleepy and tired and telling you how tired I am and how uninterested I am. I'm going to try and bring my best. Because I tell myself, if I gave this podcast, say it's a 3-minute podcast, right? I gave this 3-minute podcast. I waste 3 minutes of my time, right? But your listeners, say 100 of them, I'm collectively wasting 300 minutes of their time. So I'm always thinking about how do I best serve a community? What do I put out there? And so I'm often very cognizant of the time of my counterparts. Is it then about being toxic positivity? No, I don't subscribe to toxic positivity. I do say I am tired, right? I am a little bit under the weather, but I'm still going to give my best, right? I think it is being able to be authentic and own our own vulnerabilities, frailties, but yet still honor and show our counterparts that we really care and we honor their time and their invitation.
Thank you. And that's the whole objective of Atlanta Diaries. And this takes me to the next question, Loretta. While you spoke about your parents, and it's just so wonderful to hear about this equal upbringing, but would like to double click more on how did your early years shape your journey? How did it determine how you've donned so many hats? Professor, theater director, author, consultant, entrepreneur, and the list just goes on and on.
Growing up, we weren't wealthy, but I think it is seeing that I always had food on the table. I never had to really think about rent. I never had to think about food. And recognizing that compared to my other friends that lived in really big houses and had chauffeurs or drivers and had, all the luxuries in life, but I never felt that I had any less. And I think that came from love. So I think that's important, that sense of knowing that my parents were always going to be there for me. So I think that in itself was key. But of course, like any wayward teenager that has a mind of their own, who doesn't? I had to forge my own path because I was the youngest, because I knew I was spoiled. I wanted to go out to work, to have opportunities. And again, my parents supported me. It was funny, like I would take on all these odd jobs and my parents would be there to take me lunch and pick me back from work, So I was doing it less out of necessity, but out of a real desire to want to engage with the world and always knowing I'll always have my parents to fall back on, right? So that intense desire, the innate desire to always want to learn, I think is probably something that is within me. But then later on, I obviously, as any young person, will make choices. I don't think they're mistakes, but I think that they are choices that I made given what I knew and given what sort of hormones were driving me. So I would say one of the key moments that shaped my life, I will always go back to when I was 24 and I met my first love. Her name is Grace, and we embarked on a relationship. And fortunately or unfortunately, she suffered from severe depression and she eventually committed suicide. But that was where my growth started, because I started to really question about the fragility and meaning of life. Because here I was, a 24-year-old, who was at the height of my scholastic abilities, right? I was given a scholarship to read my master's in University of London by the National Arts Council in Singapore. And then I was given a full scholarship in UCLA to read my doctorate under Professor Sue Ellen Case, who was a very renowned professor. But I also fell in love with Grace. And I think that's why I've become such a proponent and mental health advocate, because I recognize the importance of seeking help. And mind you, this was like 24 years ago. So I think Grace's death really made me try to find the meaning of life very early. So unlike a lot of my counterparts who are in their 20s, probably yourself, one of them, once upon a time, trying to make your mark, right? Find a career, maybe, you're dating a man and trying to start a family. A lot of people had these sorts of conversations, whereas my conversations was, what's the meaning of life? Because I just experienced something very tragic. But I think witnessing that at such a young age and not really having the vocabulary, forced me to find ways to heal, right? So in hindsight, what I'll tell the story is how I've learned was that my 24-year-old self was so broken, and I didn't really have a book to read because most of the books I read were written by women, Caucasian women, very different experiences from me as an Asian woman, very different sort of values and upbringing. So I remember telling myself that, if I ever got better, I wanted to use my voice, my corporeality to tell stories so that people could identify with me, right? This Asian woman with this sort of features, and sharing her journey. So to take us back, I remember after Grace suicided, obviously I had a period of real depression. And I remember taking myself to volunteering and working in Cambodia, in Vietnam. And I remember one of the key moments that forever changed my life was volunteering with sex traffic workers in Cambodia. And I was talking to these sex traffic workers who are between the ages of 8 to 18. Some of them are younger. And I remember I had a Khmer interpreter. And I asked these girls, girls, what are you going to be when you grow up? I mean, it took some time for them to trust me, because obviously they have trust issues, having been beaten and abused and made to do the most horrific things. I remember asking these girls, well, girls, what do you want to be when you grow up? The answers came back, oh, I want to be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a nurse. And then the next question was, well, why? Why do you want to be that? And I remember the mutterings that came and they said, well, because they want to save the world. And so I always take a step back and a little gulp of breath when I say this, because here were girls who had been taken off their prime of their lives, being made to do some of those horrific things. And yet I could see audacity and hope in their eyes. And they weren't just wishing for a better life for themselves, they're wishing for a better life for other people. So I remembered my 24-year-old self telling myself and making a little pact with myself that henceforth, I wanted to tell myself that, nobody was going to make me feel inferior without my consent. And that's a quote I take from Eleanor Roosevelt. And I also made myself recognize that, my ability to choose, to be there, to serve, to lead is built on the backs of the millions of boys and girls that will never have the ability to choose. We like to think, especially in America, that we all have a right to freedom and happiness and choice and liberty. But in reality, it's a privilege. It is something that I don't take for granted. The fact that you and I can be here doing a podcast, because we could be in Ukraine, right? We could be living the time of our life, and the next day you're involved in war. Or you could be living the time of your life, and the next day, a fire takes away every single possession. So I'm always reminded that our lives ebb and flow, that we should always be grateful for the opportunities that we have. And, something else that I remember, a dear friend of mine, Professor Shirley Daniel, she would remind me, with wealth, compare with people who have less than you. With wisdom, compare with people who have more than you. So these fundamental things that have shaped me as a young adult, going through challenges and then finding experiences which uplift and empower, and then taking all these experiences and then amplifying it in everything that I do.
That's very interesting. Loretta, I'm going to pick up a word from one of your articles, which said that you're multi-hyphenate, right? So tell me, was then this journey deliberate and aligned to your why, or was it organic? Talk to me more about how did you traverse this journey of a multi-hyphenate?
That's a great question, Enma. I think a variety of things. I think as a young child, my propensity I was always curious about many things, right? And so I can only tell this story in hindsight because now I have the vocabulary to unpack. I was always interested in the arts and music and dance and theater and philosophy and people. I was always fascinated with people, but I was also fascinated with the science of what made things tick. Why does this happen? Right? I was always constantly asking why? And I realized that our education system back then tried to put people in boxes. And I remembered my grades were good enough for me to go to a science class or a science stream. But I love the ability to express, and I picked the arts. And back then, mind you, when you pick the arts, it could be seen as a failure because this was how we would grade our classes or name our classes. If you were in a science class, you were an A or B class. If you're in an arts class, you're a C or D class, right? Yeah. So already it gives a mindset that if you're a loser and a failure, you went to the arts. But somehow in my heart, I knew that I wasn't a loser or failure. I chose it. It was a choice. I loved it. So always at the back of my head, I was always telling myself, how do I allow people to recognize that you are not a loser? You're not a failure. If you chose the arts, it's a choice. And so I said, I had to be the best that I could be, not to compete with the world, but to use myself as a litmus test, as a guinea pig, to show that I could excel in the arts and yet also be able to sit there and have a business discussion. I remember I was talking to the deputy CEO of the National Arts Council yesterday, Lynette Pang. She also has a very similar background. She's an artist, but she's also an astute marketeer and a businesswoman. And I remember, we said, yeah, that's our big bugbear. Because one of the things that still happens today in Singapore, even though I reside in the United States and Hawaii, is that people still like to see the arts as something that has to be subsidized by the government, constantly in need of subsidy and aid. I remember in my 30s when I was telling about my one business adventure, it was because I was the first person to create a theater company that was a for-profit. That was a game changer. Why? Because everyone thought that the arts has to be a handout. You have to be a not-for-profit. But for me, I was like, I want to prove that the arts can be a viable career. And so I wanted to be the first to say, I want to run my arts company as a for-profit. Is it a challenge? Is it difficult? Is it a sheer stupidity? Yes, but it was an experiment I really was willing to take. Did I lose money in the end? Yes, right? Because a lot of people still believe that the arts had to be subsidized. We need double taxation in order to support the arts. But to your point, I always felt that I needed to know a lot of things in order to then prove my point, because I wanted to prove that arts could be a viable career. And as such, I needed to learn business. And in order to market what I was trying to learn, I had to become a marketeer, right? There were no real marketing courses that I could take back then, 20, 30 years ago, about marketing the arts. But I learned by putting myself out there, learning by failure, fail fast, learn fast, get back on again. And then I also recognized that I wanted to create an ecosystem, because if an ecosystem was lacking, then what I'm trying to create, a healthy sort of ecosystem with linking business, finance, the arts, tech would be lacking. So what was the key point? Education for me was key. So I knew that I had to go out, proselytize, talk, speak, be a key spokesperson. So then the speaking engagement started happening. And then later on, so on and so forth. So each time I was interested, keen, and eager to prove a point, I needed to take on many hats, because my key was always to create ecosystems. So to put it in context, something that I'm doing right now, I'm right now a pioneer in the Metaverse space. And because I'm a pioneer in the Metaverse space, I need to be educator, artist, scientist, technologist, speaker, financier, producer. I need to take on all these hats because I need to connect all the dots, bring all these people together to say, I need to create an ecosystem. I need to bring the best of all these people into the space because I can't do it myself. So as a result, I become a bit of a multi-hyphenate because I learn a little bit about VC, how they think. I learn a little bit about technologists, how they think. I learn a little bit from the NFT and blockchain experts, how they think. I learn a little bit from the Metaverse experts, how they think. Because what I have to do is bring all these people together on the table to create networks.
Very powerful. Loretta, how will you explain Metaverse to a layperson? Love to use this opportunity to share with people what is Metaverse.
So how I'll tell our audience is Web 1, think of it as the age of information, where you're able to access information from the internet, but it's largely one way, right? You log on and you find out, okay, what's the latest movie playing, or what's the weather, or what's happening in the news. So it's very much one way. Mass media companies or corporations still own the ability to dictate what you read and what you see. So that is the age of information, right? It's kind of like mass media where, back in the day, you rely on the news agencies or television to tell you information. Web 2 is the age that we're in now, where it's the age of interaction, where you and I can be on Zoom now. You can then later put this on LinkedIn. You can put this conversation on a podcast. You can put it out on social media, and everyone becomes a media platform. So you see the breakdown of mass media into what is called social media, because technically you and I can all be mass media platforms, right? You have big enough a base, you become a social media influencer, you become a mass media operator on your own. It's the age of interaction. But people started questioning about who owns all these data, right? You put out all these wonderful podcasts, you put out all these wonderful photographs, but fundamentally, you don't own the platforms. Someone else owns those platforms. You are basically a renter. You can be Kim Kardashian with XYZ, 100 million followers, whatever. But fundamentally, you don't own the platform, right? If Meta wants to pull off the platform, all of your content is gone. So I think increasingly folks are really questioning, how do I begin then to own my data, own my identity? And also we are also in the age where a lot of our identities are used, right? So Web3 is really trying to solve the challenges that we see in Web 2. Is it a perfect world? No, right? I don't believe in utopia. I don't believe in perfection, but I certainly believe in progress and constant change. Web 3 is the age of immersion, identity, and interoperability. So just for ease of remembering, Web 1 is age of information, Web 2 is age of interaction, Web 3 is immersion, identity, interoperability. And we also now are asking, how can we own more of our own data, right? So that's where the blockchain comes in, right? Because with blockchain, you can prove ownership, and ownership is a very powerful tool. And then, of course, with interoperability, we're trying to create all these platforms where different metaverses are interoperable. So to your point, what is a metaverse? A metaverse is a immersive, interoperable environment where we can be locked on 24/7. Whether or not we want to is not the point, but that it is pervasive, it is possible, and we can be in an environment where we're interacting and bringing all of ourselves into a space.
This is so fascinating. I can see your passion and the excitement when you talk about the metaverse, Loretta. What was your biggest joy as a leader?
Uplifting people. I love working. As you would know, I've been privileged to be able to work with CEOs of banks, but I still work with the incarcerated. I still work with very depressed populations, very low income populations. I love seeing bringing worlds together, but more than anything else, I love being able to create opportunities for folks who are denied opportunities for whatever reason, race, sexuality, religion, gender. I love being able to know that whatever limited resources or power or spheres of influence I have, to uplift them, inspire them. So I'll tell you that I get a similar joy from closing a deal with a big client to when a student from a depressed population texts me and say, Miss Chen or Dr. Chen, I really, really enjoy your classes. I really look forward to your classes and you've changed my life. I get immense joy from serving those communities and having that one text, and sometimes even more joy than closing a deal.
No, I see that. I think it's euphoria versus fulfillment. And as a coach, I can so relate to it. You support a client, you finish your call and you're like, okay, I've done my deed for the day. I've created this awareness and helped somebody come to some hopeful solutions. I think I know exactly what you mean. Like you said, pushing boundaries, and you've got such lofty goals, right? I'm sure there's been highs and lows in these journeys. Share with us your obstacles and how did you overcome them, or your greatest mistake and what did you learn from it?
Great question. The higher the highs, the lower the lows. I really think so, right? And I think what's important is to always try and find some balance in between. I would say some of my biggest challenges were obviously from a business point of view, that 2008-2009 financial crisis where I lost a lot of money investing in a theatre company because I truly wanted to propel an industry. But I realized that I was always ahead of my time. But does that stop me? No. Now that I am older and hopefully wiser, one of the things that I learned is that I think living your dreams and your beliefs and your passion is hugely important. But I also think having that great team around you is also crucial. So one of the things that I learned from that business challenge, one, really needing to have dual perspectives. While I was so focused on building my company, I failed to see the larger social, political, macro context, which is that around me, the recession was already looming. But my younger 30-something self was very gung-ho. I was like, regardless, even with the recession, I can still make it, right? I still have that verve and that drive. But today, I may be a little bit more nuanced and be able to read the signs a little bit more and say, okay, maybe not the best time to launch a huge production because sponsors may pull out, right? Because in a recession, one of the first things, even though I will not cut the arts, I need to recognize that corporations will cut the arts from their budget. Right? It was one thing that I didn't want to see because I was so fervent in wanting to push the arts as an industry. So today, now that I'm older, I'll be like, okay, Loretta, even though this is your passion, your vision, you're very purposeful, you need to understand you don't control the world. Your sponsors may pull out and you may lose money. And in turn, your staff may lose their job. So you need to think through. So I think purpose, vision is very important. But now add to that, really studying the science as well. So that's one big lesson. The other lesson is to never, this is me, and feel free to disagree, never go into 50-50 partnerships because that's what I did with my partners. I put in the money, but we gave 50-50. And so when it came to the crisis, my business partner said, let's continue the business. But I was the one bleeding because I was the one putting cash. And so we had a stalemate because it was 50-50. So the partner that was not putting cash was saying, let's continue. But I was bleeding and I said, you don't know how to keep pumping in money. But because we are 50-50, there was a stalemate. And in business, the thing that you don't have, like I said, is time. The stalemate caused us so much more loss and money. So I always tell my business students, anyone that wants to go into entrepreneurship, the business books and the wedding vows will tell you 50-50 equal is perfect. But when you have an altercation, the inability to make a decision is what cost you money, time, and heartache. So even if you had a shareholder that has 1% more, that is key because in times of crisis, you need that 1%. So that's the other thing that I learned. The other thing that I learned too is that you can go in with the best intentions, but sometimes people will still have envy. So I'll say something very openly that is very recent. Okay, I have a bit of a laugh about it. Recently, we went for a get-together with a lot of studios that are building the Metaverse. And I remembered I was very candid and I left a full stack of my name cards on the table. And then I left to host and talk to people. When I came back, my entire stack was gone. So I thought, oh, maybe I've forgotten and I misplaced it or whatever. But I knew that I left it there. And then later on, I said, there was another event. It was a networking event. And I said, I'm not going to go to that because I'm busy. And to be honest, I really wanted to head home to spend time with my family because my family is very important. But as luck would have it, I ended up in the same taxi as some of my guests. And so I said, I'm just going to pop into the event for a while because my guests were there and I was chauffeuring them there. But because I didn't sign up for the event, I couldn't go in because I announced to the table, I'm not going to the event because I didn't sign up. But I sent my guests there. And so I waited around. And as I was waiting around, I had to use the bathroom. So I asked the host, could I use the bathroom? The host said, yes, you can't go to the event, but you can use the bathroom. I said, sure. So I went to the bathroom and I found the whole stack of my name cards in the sanitary disposal. And I put two and two together, which tells me someone around me took my whole stack of name cards, knowing that, probably a she, presumed that I'll be going, and took all my name cards and disposed of it to prevent me from networking and creating opportunity. So again, I wasn't upset, but it was more a recognition that you can go in with the best intentions. You can go in being very open, very genuine. There could still be people that would be jealous of you, see you as a threat, see you as an opponent, and try to thwart all your opportunities to succeed. That's also one thing that I want to share with your listeners, to not let that get you down. Did that impact me on that day? Of course. I would be lying if I said I didn't. I'm still human. To see that someone was trying to thwart all your opportunities and literally throwing it away into a disposal bin was still sad. But I tell myself that, hey, it's, you live and let live, but you don't get upset, you don't get angry. Did it impact me for a day or two? Yes, it did. That's why I'm still talking about it. But I try to channel it to our listeners to say, don't let that hamper you from being the best that you can be. Don't let that stop you from saying, oh, people don't like me, they're naysayers, let me just give up, right? Because for every naysayer and hater, there's also someone that's going to love you. There's also someone that's going to invite you to a podcast, right? And work around your timing as you have. And so, like I said, always have balanced perspective. Yeah. So every day there's a lesson to be learned.
So before I started Atlanta Diaries, I did a small survey. And because I coach women leaders, I wanted to validate my understanding and perceptions. And a very interesting theme came out. And it was a very consistent theme. And I want to share a few questions with you, and I'd love to know what you think about it. So one of the questions which came multiple times was that women have to prove their point, whereas men have to simply state it. What are your thoughts?
I do think that there is still some of that. I think that have the tide shifted, yes. Are there some countries that are still more patriarchal than others? Absolutely, right? We're all at different stages of our development and women empowerment and enlightenment. Do I still think that women still have to work a little bit harder? Absolutely. And in fact, for me, one of the things that I remembered very consciously doing as a little girl, because I was always very observant as a little girl, I recognized that men just need to walk in a room, state their point, and people will listen. Women have to work that much harder. So I actually took it upon myself. I didn't get sad. I took it upon myself to do two things. I recognized that when women showed up, they were kinder, gentler, softer, more empathetic, and they could create a feeling of congeniality and coalition faster. So I consciously, as a young child, grew up wanting to learn two things I didn't recognize that there were gender differences, right? But I just recognized, okay, this is like a female type figure, male type figure. And so I said, I wanted to learn the art of communication, the art of winning people over, the art of cultivating trust, the art of creating communities and coalitions from this women type figure. But I also wanted to learn the art of being confident, the art of having stature, the art of being able to speak confidently and command a presence as a male figure does. And I consciously learned that. And I emulated that. And I think my theatrical background allowed me to role play that a lot. I would say, okay, well, how is it that men speak with their hands, and how do they walk into a room and project that sort of confidence? And I learned that. And I learned about how women would nod and be congenial and smile. And I learned to put that together and create my own persona, right? I know how to smile and nod and have a conversation with you and speak wholeheartedly. And I say, you don't need to edit anything. Everything can be used, right? This is all of me. Very vulnerable, but confident. And yet I also learned that from male figures. So I think that's one conscious learning. I don't think we need to throw away everything that is good or bad about one gender. I think it's to see what can we take, be the master student, take the tools that serve you. It doesn't have to be the tools that is only belonging to one gender, one religion, one race, one stereotype. Take the tools that serve you. So that's one. So to women, I would say, if you are given the opportunity to be a leader in your field, do not feel threatened. In fact, try to bring more with you. Boys do that. That's why we have the old euphemism, all boys club. Let's create an all girls club, right? Bring more girls into the space. Bring more women into the space. I want that. Today, I think only like 2 to 12% in the VC space are women, right? So we need to see more. We need to create more ecosystems. We need to see more women in tech. We need to see more women as coaches. We need to see more women in leadership positions. It's happening. The tides are changing. We are now seeing the drum of diversity, equity, and inclusion. More of that is happening, and all of us can certainly play a part.
So true. In fact, that's another thing which came out in the survey, that women don't support other women. In fact, that is one of the reasons why I started Atlanta Diaries, because if I want to scale my impact, rather than trying to mentor one person at a time, let's create this platform where Loretta, for example, can mentor so many other women through one conversation. Loretta, shifting gears a little bit, you've grown up in Singapore and educated yourself in London, in the US, now live in Honolulu, which is so exciting. But before I go to Honolulu, I'd love to know on how do you navigate so many cultures?
Absolutely. I think the key is really wanting to listen and really wanting to be and live like the locals. So to add to that, right, some of the other places that I've spent extensive amount of times in would be Japan, because I still teach in a private university in Japan. I spent enormous amount of time in Bhutan because of the consultant for the government since 2010, I think. So it's been about 12 years. So I think there must be a willingness to listen and a willingness to learn. I can share an anecdote. When I was in Bhutan, I was there to consult for the government.
Yeah.
And I remember they hired me as a Singaporean with my expertise. So I remember going in and having to sit and, like an executive coach, listen to all my constituents, understand their challenges, and then write my little white paper with my recommendations. And I remember one of the challenges I saw in a particular organization in Bhutan was that it was not very competitive. There was a lot of redundancy. There was a lot of skills training. And there were a lot of folks that were in the wrong place, in the wrong job, with the wrong skill sets, right? So I remember writing this down and sharing with the CEO. And then we were having a very candid conversation over drinks in the evening. And the CEO says, you made some very astute observations. And I remember him saying, and I agree with all your observations. And he said, but I find it so hard to implement the recommendations because I don't know how to let my staff go. I don't know how to find them. I don't know how to let them go because I know their father, their mother, their brother, their sister, their dog, It sounds like a very inane comment, but I remember processing and saying, I remember being very moved. The Singaporean in me was very moved by what he says because in a more developed society like ours, we reskill, retrain, or replace, right? Because we recognize that one person just serves the community. So if that one player is not playing as well, you either remove that player, reskill them, and then you reinitiate them into the organization. Because our goals are very community-driven, goal-driven, where it's the individual serves the entire community. Bhutan, while it's similar, they see the individual as also being of equal importance to the community. While the community was important, the CEO recognizes the frailty and fragility of his ecosystem. I don't want to say he has the moral dilemma of not wanting to disengage the individual because there's another community that surrounds this individual of which he knows. He says, I know this individual's father, mother, brother, sister, dog. So I have a moral dilemma as a leader because I understand that this individual is not serving my work community, but the individual plays a part in my individual community. So I don't know how to reskill, retool, or reassess or replace this person. So again, it gave me an insight that cultural differences is real. It's not one size fits all. Consultants can come in as McKinsey, as PricewaterhouseCoopers, or I can go in and consult in a community. But until you wear the shoes of the leader in those roles and walk the soil that he walks or she walks, listen to the stories that he or she listens, eats the food that he or she eats and breathes, you then need to make decisions based on all this. And it makes it that much more challenging. So that's something that I learned. And so that is why one of the first things I do, even when I went to Hawaii, was I volunteered to teach in the Waianae Coast, which is the depressed, low-income population in Hawaii, because I think that that's one of the best ways for me to understand real local culture, how the real people live, what are their real challenges. Because if I come as an expatriate, right, then I'll always be here living the life of a bit of a tourist, shopping in Hawaii Kai, having conversations with academics or business folks. But you really need to understand what the locals are.
Yeah, you're talking about a lot of exploration and empathy, and that's clearly one of the top leadership skills we all want to want in our leaders today. Any anecdotes of cultural shock when you moved to the West?
Most folks don't realize that Singapore is a British colony. We actually speak English. English is our first language. So one of the things that will often come up is, oh my goodness, you don't speak English. They're like, wow, I didn't realize you speak English. And I was like, yeah, we do speak English. And they're like, oh, and that's always a fun conversation. And I'll go into that. But I remember one that was, and I'll talk about this a lot in my women's class. But this was me much younger, right? In my 20s, and now I'm pushing 50. In my 20s, I remember going this bright eye, bushy tail, and I cut the quintessential Asian bob, I remember. And I was going up the trolley in San Francisco. And so there was a guy, and he is the trolley conductor. And I remember it was a packed trolley. This was, again, 20, 25, 30 years ago, right? Where now we are more like aware that we can't say things like that. But I think back then, So the bus conductor comes up, the trolley conductor comes up to me and he says, hey, I can't remember what he said, something quite derogatory to like, you Asian doll. Oh, China doll. Hey, China doll. China doll. Wow. China doll, I would like to set you up on a date with my bus driver. And of course, I quickly looked, and bus driver is Asian. So he immediately just made that racial sort of thing. Hey, China doll, I want to hook you up. And there was that undercurrent of the sexual innuendo. China doll, I want to hook you up with my China friend, right? And say, hey, China doll, can you please, I want to set you up on a date with a China chinky friend. And he threatened me. And he said, if you don't agree to go on a date, I won't let the trolley go. He's going to stall the trolley. And he whispered in my ear. I remember my 20-something-year-old self had to make a choice. Do I say yes and acquiesce to this sort of like fun, flirty, quite threatening? He thinks it was funny, like, hey, if you don't go on a date with my Chinese chinky friend, I'm not going to let the trolley go, Do I allow that to slide, or do I make a point? And I mean, today I would be able to be more confident about it, right? My 20-something-year-old self was, one, a little bit shocked, a little bit scared, a little bit worried. And I remember thinking, what should I do? And I remember, for some reason, I mustered all my courage. And I remember announcing to the entire trolley. I said, hi, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, I've got an announcement to make. I would like you all to know that this gentleman here has asked that me, this China doll, has to go on a date with our Chinese bus driver. And first off, I'm not from China, I'm from Singapore, right? But he has asked me, this China doll, to go out with the China bus driver. And if I didn't go out with this Chinese bus driver, the trolley conductor would refuse to take all of us on the trolley. He would just refuse to take off. And so I remember when I said that, he was stunned and he was embarrassed, right? And then after that, I just left the trolley. And I remember like crying a little bit because there was that sense of relief, that sense of shame, that sense of guilt, that sense of so many things. But I remember that at that point in time, I needed to make that statement because I knew that I was targeted because I was Asian. So I had to make a point for all women. So I always remember that story quite clearly in my head because it was so many things at play, right? It was race, it was gender, and it was power.
Very courageous, Loretta. Loretta, you talk about now your personal tagline is people, purpose, and possibilities. Share with us then from your mission.
Oh gosh, such a great question, Enma. I mean, thank you for researching on me. People, purpose, possibility, and pets. I have many pets. I have 18 biological kitty kits and 4 foster kits, and I feed the ducks and the chickens. People, because I will always bet my dollar on human capital, because in spite of all our technological advancements and possibilities, the one thing that propels it is human ability. Even as I'm in the Metaverse space, pushing the boundaries of technology, I still fundamentally think that all of these is not possible if we don't come together, we don't have conversations, we don't make things happen. Human capital is still the most important source of capital there is. So that's one. And I think collectively, we're all here for a very short amount of time. So I think as much as possible, I want to be able to elevate anyone that comes into my realm, because I truly believe that if we can elevate one another to find our purpose, our calling, our mission, our values, that becomes our North Star. We'll never lose sight of that, right? So at any point in time, whenever I'm down, when I realize that someone tried to sabotage me at work, or someone tries to make a sexual pass at me just because I'm an Asian girl, or losing money in a business venture, I'm always reminded that 1, all of this will pass. 2, I'm only here for a really short time. The legacy that I want to leave may not be in dollars and cents, but it certainly is in having inspired, uplifted, empowered someone else, because people forget what you do, but they don't forget how you make them feel.
That's beautiful. We can't not talk about your role as a fur mom. So tell us more about it.
So fur mummyhood really started because a few things. One, I knew very early on that I didn't want to be a biological mother because, one, I think my mother was very interesting, a woman. I talk about her all the time because she's at that age now where she's quite frail. She's 86. It's kind of touch and go. And she's always told me to call someone mummy is easy, to be a mummy is difficult. Somehow that stuck with me. And I always then remembered that because I always felt even as a young person, my calling is to be a teacher, a mentor. So I always said that I didn't want to have my own biological children because then I can mentor many more. And then the other reason too is because I have very bad joints, right? It's something that just also grounded me. I have a really bad osteoarthritis. I've had 10 surgeries. And so just physically as well, bearing extra weight, it's not good for me. And so I'm very thankful I married a very open-minded husband who said we don't need children for us to have a very fulfilled life. So I think for all intents and purposes, all these reasons, having fur babies was my calling. I also think that it is the most unconditional love as well. Because for all of you mummies, and there's my new book coming out, for all of you mummies, I hats off to you because I think that once you become a mother, once a mother, forever a mother, right? You worry about your child, even if they're 60, right? Or 70 years old, they'll always be your child. And for me, my form of motherhood is slightly different in that my children tend to already be young adults or adults that I nurture, mentor, and then you sort of set them free, right? Because they're not my own biological children. But the fur babies teach me unconditional selfless love because all these little lives have a very short lifespan. I bring them in knowing it's going to make me cry. I bring them in knowing that they're going to leave before me. But it fundamentally teaches me letting go. It fundamentally teaches me loving something so unconditionally and letting them go. In the same way, or a very different way, a mother would never wish that on their child, right? A mother will always say, I want to live as long as I can to be there for my child, and I want my child to outlive me, right? So my kind of motherhood teaches me love in a very different way.
Loretta, through your latest publication, Mother, and thank you for giving me the privilege of reading it before it's really out there. You've brought spotlight to, I think, a very special role, which we often take for granted. Share with us what motivated you to author Mother.
Yeah. So for context, for our listeners, so Mother is really about giving the spotlight on typically unrepresented or alternative modalities of motherhood, right? So incarcerated mothers, rape survivor mothers, teen mothers, single moms, foster moms, LGBTQIA, transgender mom and dads, gay mom and dads, terminally ill mothers, of which one has already passed away. The motivation was on a very selfish perspective. It was because I wrote it during the pandemic, where there was no end in sight on when I could see my mother again. And there was a fear that I would lose her during this time and not be able to hold her or see her again. So that was when Mother started. The other was to really shed light on having role models, right? And hence the other mother. For those of us who are privileged enough to have mother figures in our lives, it's a privilege. There are many who don't. And yet there are also many others who take on the role of parenting without the support, mental, financial, geographical, physical support of typical motherhood, right? In a heteronormative setting, you have a father figure who brings home the bacon, the mother figure takes care of the children, and structures to support, whether it's the in-laws or community. In non-heteronormative families, that is even harder. If you're a teenage mom that has been expunged or disowned by your family, or if you are a rape survivor mother who does not even know who the father is, or if you harbor very unhappy memories with how the child was conceived, or with terminally ill mothers who know that their time with their child is very limited, or with LGBTQIA moms and dads who don't have the support, right? Especially in Singapore, where alternative lifestyles are still frowned upon. So that really was the inspiration to use my platform to be able to enable the discussion. Will it change things overnight? No. Again, I'm not a Pollyanna, but do I hope that it will ignite conversations for us to be a little bit more empathetic to teenage mothers, to be a little bit more empathetic to incarcerated mothers? Nobody really thinks about them. How do they raise their child when they're in there? How do their kids then come out in society? How do they coexist with stigma, right? Knowing that their parents have a drug record or a jail record. How do we integrate them? How do we create possibilities for them to be integrated? So all these are the reasons why I wanted to write this book, to hear from these mothers. And I'm not saying women, because not all of them are women. Some of them are transgender dads and gay dads. So how can we create opportunities, platforms, possibilities to enable a gentler world such that they're not stigmatized, right? So that really was the inspiration.
It's a beautiful tribute. This has been so wonderful, Loretta. This has been really inspiring and insightful. Any parting thoughts for aspiring leaders as they transition?
So to really know who you are, I think that's very important. So having a coach like yourself is important, right? I think you can't really lead others if you don't really know yourself, right? We may never really know 100% of us, but having a deeper, more insightful knowledge of us with all our frailties and flaws and foibles is great, because then you don't present your insecurities on other people, right? I often like to say that those with the lower self-esteem also have the biggest egos. They tend to go together. So I think it's really important to have coaches like you as well to be able to help navigate folks that need help. And we all do, right? The other is allowing yourself to always be open, gaining more perspective so that you're not caught up in your own little navel gazing, but learn to see things from other people's point of view. I think that's very important. And to be personally self-reflexive, meaning to always be conscious where we are, to take stock of our day, to have a little time for a little personal meditation, like how did I do today? Not as a chance to beat yourself up, right? But also as a chance to really take stock. How did my day go? I was really tired. But not to beat yourself up consistently, just to objectively observe yourself so that you can be better every single day. And it's not a challenge. Life is not a challenge. Life is not a competition. But it should be challenging enough to make you want to do better, to find some joy, to find some curiosity. But you should also learn to really have a sense of humor, to laugh, to be silly, to have fun, love a few pets, walk in the woods and smell the roses, and have conversations with uplifting women such as the ones that we're doing.
Wonderful, wonderful life lesson. Thank you very much, Loretta. That was really amazing.
Thank you so much, Emma. I really appreciate you, and thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, do hang on for just one more minute. I have a request for you. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Atlanta Diaries on Spotify, iTunes, or whichever platform you follow. Do join us in our mission to empower and inspire by sharing the podcast with a friend or colleague. It will be great if you can share on the social media platforms you follow, be it LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or any other. Please leave a review or rating on iTunes or Spotify. It really helps us reach a wider audience. Lastly, I wanted to share with you that many of my coaching clients and listeners have created a cheat sheet with their key takeaways from the episodes. I invite you to consider jotting down 1 or 2 key takeaways as you navigate your amazing journey. Have a wonderful rest of the day and see you next week for another inspiring journey on Atlanta Diaries.